On the night of my 70th birthday, my wife Patricia did not bring out a cake. Instead, she stood in the center of the ballroom I had paid for brick by brick and announced into the microphone, "Harlan, this is the gift I have hidden from you for 30 years. She pointed to the entrance, and a strange man walked in, followed by 2 grown children. The room went silent. My daughter Caroline dropped her champagne glass. The man walked right up to my wheelchair, patted my cheek, and whispered, "Happy birthday, old man. Thanks for keeping the seat warm." Everyone looked at me with pity, thinking I was just a senile old fool about to have a heart attack. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I just smiled and reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a small black velvet box I had prepared 5 years ago. I said, "I knew, Patricia. This is for you." She opened it expecting diamonds, but when she saw what was inside, her hands began to tremble so violently that the box fell to the floor. Before I tell you what was in that box and how I destroyed them all, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that loyalty is more important than blood. My name is Harlan Ford, and for 40 years I built skyscrapers in Chicago. I dealt with union strikes, corrupt politicians, and freezing winters. I thought I knew what a snake looked like. I was wrong. The most dangerous snake was sleeping in my bed. The evening started with the smell of expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal glasses in our Lake Forest estate. It was supposed to be a celebration of my life. My daughter Caroline was standing on the small stage holding a glass of vintage red wine. She looked beautiful, her eyes shining with tears as she began to speak about how I raised her alone after her mother passed away. She was saying, "Dad, you have always been my rock." But she never got to finish that sentence. The feedback from the microphone screeched through the room, tearing through the atmosphere like a knife. Patricia, my wife of 30 years, stepped onto the stage. She was wearing a red dress that was far too young for her 58 years. She literally snatched the microphone from Caroline's hand. My daughter looked shocked, but she stepped back. She had always been too polite for her own good. Patricia laughed, that high-pitched laugh that used to sound like bells to me, but now sounded like warning sirens. "Oh, stop with the boring speeches, Caroline," Patricia said, her voice amplified across the room. "We are here to celebrate Harlan, and I have the biggest surprise of his life." I sat in my wheelchair near the front. To everyone else, I looked like a frail old man. My hands were resting on a blanket over my knees. I let my head droop slightly to the left. It was a pose I had perfected over the last 6 months. The doctor called it early onset dementia. I called it camouflage. Patricia swept her arm toward the double oak doors at the entrance of the hall. Doors opened. A man walked in. He was tall, with dyed black hair, and a suit that looked expensive from a distance, but cheap up close. Behind him were a boy and a girl in their 20s, looking around my house like they were appraising merchandise at an auction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced, "meet Greg, and our children, Leo and Mia." A gasp went through the room. 50 of my closest business partners, friends, and neighbors stood frozen. This was not just an affair. This was a second life. Patricia continued without a shred of shame. "Harlan and I have had a modern arrangement for a long time," she lied smoothly. "Greg has been my rock while I cared for poor Harlan as his mind started to fade. We thought it was time to stop hiding. Today marks our 30th anniversary, and I want my family to be whole." I watched her face. She was glowing. Not with love, but with victory. She had timed this perfectly. According to our prenuptial agreement signed 3 decades ago, If we stayed married for 30 years, she would be entitled to half of everything I owned, unconditionally. Today was year 30, day 1. She thought she had crossed the finish line. Greg walked through the crowd. He had the swagger of a man who had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. He stopped right in front of me. He smelled of stale tobacco and heavy cologne. He looked down at me, and his eyes were empty. There was no respect, just greed. He leaned down close enough that only I could hear. "So this is the great Harlan Ford. You look smaller than in the pictures. Don't worry, Pops. We will take good care of the house. You just rest." Then he patted my cheek. Pat, pat, like I was a dog. Rage is a funny thing. When you are young, it burns like fire. When you are 70, it freezes like ice. I felt a cold calm wash over me. I looked at Caroline. She was shaking, ready to lunge at him, but I caught her eye. I gave her the slightest signal, just a tiny movement of my index finger. Wait. I needed them to think I was weak. I needed them to think they had won. So I let my hand shake uncontrollably. I reached for my water glass on the table and intentionally knocked it over. The water spilled onto my trousers. "Oops," I mumbled, slurring my words. "A mess. I made a mess." Patricia rushed over, playing the concerned wife for the audience. "Oh, poor darling. See, everyone, this is why I need Greg. Harlan is just so confused these days." Greg laughed loud and harsh. "It is okay, old-timer. We will get the maid to clean you up. Get used to it." They looked at me with disgust masked as pity. They saw a broken old man sitting in a puddle of water. They saw a checkbook that was about to be cashed. They saw a mansion they were about to steal. But they were not looking closely enough. If they had looked into my eyes, they would have seen that they were clear, sharp, focused. They did not know that the cameras in the chandeliers were recording every word. They did not know that the lawyers were already standing in the shadows of the hallway. And they certainly did not know about the document inside my jacket pocket. Patricia turned back to the crowd, raising her glass. To honesty, and to new beginnings. I gripped the armrest of my wheelchair. My knuckles were white. "Enjoy your toast, Patricia. Drink it down, because it is the last thing you will ever taste in this house." The humiliation was burning my skin, but I let it burn. I stored it away, adding it to the fuel I would need for what was coming next. I took a deep, shaky breath and prepared to drop the bomb. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the last guest, leaving the grand hall in a silence that was far more deafening than the murmurs of the crowd had been. The waiters and catering staff were practically running to the kitchen, keeping their heads down because they were too embarrassed to look at me. They had worked for me for years, and seeing the master of the house humiliated like this was painful for them. I sat in my wheelchair, in the center of the Persian rug, my hands resting limply on my lap while the air in the room grew thick with tension. My daughter Caroline was vibrating with rage. She looked from Patricia to Greg and then back to me, waiting for me to stand up and throw them out. But I remained frozen. When she realized I was not going to move, she took matters into her own hands. "You are disgusting!" Caroline screamed at Patricia, her voice cracking with emotion. "Get out of this house. Get out right now and take your trash with you." She lunged forward. Caroline had never been a violent person, but grief and anger can change anyone. She reached for Patricia, intending to drag her out by that red dress, but she never made contact. A massive hand intercepted her arm. I had not noticed the man standing in the shadows of the hallway until now. He was built like a vending machine, wearing a black t-shirt that strained against his biceps. One of Greg's people, a bodyguard. He shoved Caroline back with effortless cruelty, sending her stumbling into the side of the sofa. "Hey, watch it, princess," the bodyguard grunted. Caroline gasped, clutching her arm, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Dad, did you see that? Do something!" I felt a surge of adrenaline hit my bloodstream, so hard it almost broke my cover. I wanted to stand up, grab the fireplace poker, and teach that thug a lesson about touching my daughter. My muscles twitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to take a shallow, rattling breath. I looked at Caroline with cloudy, confused eyes and did nothing. To act now would be to lose the war. I had to sacrifice the battle. Patricia walked over to the bodyguard and placed a calming hand on his arm before turning her gaze to Caroline. She had the audacity to look disappointed, like a mother scolding a toddler. "Calm down, Caroline," Patricia said, smoothing the front of her dress as if she had just been jostled by a breeze. "You are overreacting. We are all adults here. This is the 21st century, and families come in all shapes and sizes." She walked over to me and stood behind my wheelchair, placing her hands on my shoulders. Her touch made my skin crawl. It felt like a branding iron. "Tell her, Harlan," she purred, leaning down so her perfume filled my nose. "Tell her that you understand. Look at you. You are 70 years old. You are tired. Your mind is wandering. You need a nurse, not a wife." "But I am still young. I still have needs. I have so much love to give." She gestured to Greg, who was pouring himself a drink from my private collection without asking. "Greg makes me happy," she continued, "and a happy wife means a happy life for you too, Harlan. We can live here together. Greg and the children bring life to this mausoleum. It is a perfect arrangement. You get care and I get love. We are a modern family." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired it. She was reframing her adultery as a humanitarian act. She was not cheating on me, she was doing me a favor. Greg raised his glass in a mock salute. "Exactly. I am here to help. Consider me the new man of the house. I will handle the heavy lifting while you nap in the sun, old-timer." Then the invasion began in earnest. It wasn't just words anymore. It was physical. The two children, Leo and Mia, began to move through the living room like they were inspecting a hotel room they had just checked into. They had no respect for the history of the place, for the artifacts I had collected over 40 years of travel. Mia, the girl, picked up a Ming vase from the mantelpiece. She held it by the neck, swinging it carelessly. "This place is so dusty," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It smells like old people. We need to gut this room, Mom. Paint everything white. Get rid of this heavy wood. It is depressing." Patricia laughed. "Whatever you want, sweetie. We will call the decorators tomorrow." My heart seized. That vase was the last gift my first wife gave me before she died. But I kept my face blank. Leo, the boy, was worse. He didn't just look, he claimed. He walked straight past me into my study, which connected to the living room. The double doors were open. My study was my sanctuary. It was where I built my empire, where I sketched the blueprints for the skyline of Chicago. No one went in there without my permission, not even the cleaners. Leo flopped down into my leather chair. The chair groaned under his weight. He spun around, laughing. And then he did something that made my blood boil. He lifted his legs and slammed his dirty sneakers onto the surface of my mahogany desk. "Nice chair," he shouted from the other room. "Comfy. I think I will make this my gaming room. The Wi-Fi signal should be good in here." That desk was imported from Italy. I had signed contracts worth millions on that wood. And now a 25-year-old parasite was grinding mud into the finish. Caroline could not take it anymore. She ran to me and fell to her knees, gripping my hands. She shook me, desperate to find the father she knew. "Dad, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Do not let them do this. That is your desk. That is Mom's vase. Throw them out. Call the police. Why are you just sitting there?" I looked at her. I saw the pain in her eyes, the feeling of betrayal. She thought I had abandoned her. She thought my mind was truly gone. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I let my jaw go slack. I let a little bit of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth. I looked at Patricia, then at Greg, then at Caroline. And I nodded. It was a weak, pathetic nod, a nod of submission. "See, Patricia," exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "He agrees. He knows what is best. He just wants peace." Caroline let go of my hands as if they had burned her. She stood up, slowly backing away from me. The look on her face was not anger anymore. It was pity, and that hurt worse than the anger. "You are gone, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "You are really gone. The dad I knew would never allow this." She wiped her eyes and glared at Patricia. "Enjoy your victory, but do not expect me to watch." Caroline turned and ran out of the room. I heard the front door slam seconds later. The sound echoed through the house, leaving me alone with the wolves. Patricia sighed and poured herself a drink. "Finally, I thought she would never leave. She is so dramatic." Greg walked over and sat on the sofa, putting his arm around my wife. He looked at me with a smirk. "He is kind of creepy, though," Greg said, gesturing to me with his glass. "Does he just stare like that all the time?" "He is harmless," Patricia said, kissing Greg on the cheek. "Just ignore him. He probably does not even know who we are right now. He is in his own little world." She was right about one thing. I was in my own world. But it was not a world of confusion. It was a world of calculation. I watched Leo spinning in my chair. I watched Mia judging my wife's vase. I watched Greg touching my wife. And I memorized everything. Let them get comfortable, I thought. Let them put their feet up. Let them think they own the place. Because the higher they climb, the harder the fall will be. And I was going to be the one to cut the ladder. Patricia walked over to the sound system and turned on some loud, modern pop music that shook the bass in the floorboards. She began to dance with Greg in the middle of my living room, celebrating their conquest. I closed my eyes halfway, pretending to doze off. But behind my eyelids, my mind was sharp. I was reviewing the plan. Step 1 was complete. The enemy was inside the gates. They felt safe. They felt victorious. Now it was time to move to step 2. I needed to separate the sheep from the goats and find the weak link in their chain. And looking at the boy Leo, who was currently trying to pick the lock of my desk drawer, I knew exactly where to start. The invasion was complete. But the occupation would be shorter than they could ever imagine. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of their cheap cologne and stale ambition, and I waited for the night to fall. The guest bedroom of my own house felt cold that night, even though the heating system was running perfectly. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring up at the unfamiliar shadows dancing on the ceiling. Down the hall, I could hear them. The muffled sounds of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the heavy footsteps of intruders claiming their territory. My wife was in our master bedroom, likely in the arms of another man celebrating her victory. My son-in-law, if I could even call him that, was likely raiding my wine cellar. And my stepchildren were probably destroying the order I had spent decades maintaining. But I did not feel angry anymore. Anger is a hot emotion, and what I felt was something much colder. It was a frozen clarity that I had carried with me for 5 long years. As the clock on the bedside table ticked past 2 in the morning, my mind drifted away from the snow-covered trees of Chicago. It traveled back in time to a humid afternoon in Florida, to the day I died and came back to life as a different man. It was 5 years ago at our vacation home in Boca Raton. The sun was blazing hot, reflecting off the white tiles of the patio. I remembered the smell of the ocean, mixed with the heavy scent of jasmine from the garden. I was sitting by the pool, reading a report from my structural engineer. Patricia was sitting across from me, wearing a large sun hat, flipping through a fashion magazine. We looked like the perfect retired couple, enjoying the fruits of our labor. But the rot was already there, hidden beneath the surface. I reached for my glass of iced tea, and that was when it happened. The glass slipped from my fingers. It didn't just fall. It felt like my hand had suddenly ceased to exist. The glass shattered on the patio stones, sending shards and ice everywhere. I tried to stand up to apologize, to call for the housekeeper, but my legs turned to water. The world tilted violently to the left. A roaring sound filled my ears like a jet engine taking off inside my skull. I collapsed. I hit the ground hard, my cheek pressing against the warm, rough stone. I tried to push myself up, but the entire left side of my body was dead weight. It was a stroke. I knew what it was immediately. My father had died of one. I knew that in moments like this, time was everything. Seconds meant brain cells. Minutes meant life or death. I looked up at Patricia. My vision was blurring at the edges, tunneling down to a single point. I saw her lower her magazine slowly. She did not scream. She did not jump up and run to me. She did not fumble for her phone to dial 911. She just watched. Her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but I could see the set of her mouth. It was a straight, hard line. She looked at me the way one looks at a broken appliance that is no longer under warranty. A nuisance. A problem that was about to solve itself. "Help," I tried to say, but the word came out as a garbled, wet groan. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. Patricia stood up. She smoothed her silk caftan and walked over to where I lay. She stood over me, blocking out the sun. For a moment, I thought she was coming to check my pulse. I thought she was going to save me. But she stepped over my legs and walked to the patio table where her phone was lying. She picked it up. I felt a surge of relief. She was calling for help. But then I heard her voice. It was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "David," she said, "I am sorry to bother you on the weekend. Yes, I know it is Sunday. I have a quick question about the estate planning." I lay there, my heart hammering against my ribs, a prisoner in my own failing body, listening to my wife talk to her lawyer while I lay dying. "If Harlan were to pass away due to natural causes before the 30-year mark," she asked, twirling a lock of hair around her finger, "does the trust fund still revert to Caroline, or do I get executor status immediately?" Silence. She listened to the answer. I could not hear what David was saying, but I saw Patricia frown. "I see," she said. "So if he survives but is incapacitated, I get power of attorney. But if he dies today, the prenuptial agreement limits my share. Is that correct?" She paused again. Okay. Thank you, David. No, nothing is wrong. We are just reviewing some papers and got into a debate. You know how Harlan is. He is fine. He is just swimming. She hung up the phone. She placed it back on the table face down. She turned to look at me again. I was still conscious. My eyes were locked on hers, pleading, begging. I tried to move my good hand to reach out to her, to remind her of the vows we took, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. She walked back over to me and crouched down. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were beautiful and cold, like a winter sky. You are tough, Harlan, she whispered. You always were a tough old bastard. But everyone has a breaking point. She looked at her diamond watch. I think I will go make myself a drink, she said softly. A martini sounds nice. And she left me. She walked into the house and slid the glass door shut. I was left alone on the patio, baking in the Florida sun, my brain starving for oxygen. I could see her through the glass. She went to the wet bar. She took out the shaker. She added ice. She sliced a lemon. Every movement was deliberate, slow. She was buying time. She was waiting for nature to finish the job so she wouldn't have to get her hands dirty. I do not know how long I lay there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 30 minutes. 30 minutes of hell. 30 minutes of realizing that the woman I had shared my bed with for 25 years was a monster. I thought about Caroline. I thought about my first wife. I prayed to God not to save my life, but to give me a chance to protect my daughter. I swore that if I survived this, I would not be a victim. I would be a reckoning. Eventually, she must have decided that enough time had passed. Or perhaps she worried the pool boy would arrive soon. She came back out. She checked my pulse. I closed my eyes, pretending to be unconscious. Then the performance began. "Oh my God, Harlan!" she screamed. Her voice suddenly shrill and panicked. "Harlan, wake up! Somebody help me!" She dialed 911 then. I heard her sobbing into the phone, giving them our address, begging them to hurry, saying she had just found me like this. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. The paramedics arrived in a blur of noise and chaos. They lifted me onto a stretcher. As they wheeled me through the house, I saw Patricia leaning against the doorframe, sobbing into a handkerchief. But as we passed her, she lowered the cloth for just a split second to watch me go. And in that second, I saw it. It was not relief that help had arrived. It was disappointment. She was disappointed that I was still breathing. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived with only minor motor damage. They said I was strong. They did not know that hate is a powerful fuel. When I woke up in that hospital bed, Patricia was sitting in the chair next to me, holding my hand. "Oh, darling," she cooed, "you gave me such a scare. I thought I lost you." I looked at her. I saw the lines of tension around her eyes. She was wondering how much I remembered. She was wondering if I knew she had let me lie there for half an hour while she made a drink. I made a choice then, a choice that defined the next 5 years of my life. I squeezed her hand weakly. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I slurred my words intentionally. Patricia? I stammered. What happened? I was swimming? I saw the tension leave her shoulders. She smiled. A genuine smile this time. Because she thought she was safe. She thought the stroke had wiped my memory. She thought the old Harlan was gone, and she was left with a helpless invalid she could manipulate. "You had a little accident, sweetie," she said, stroking my forehead. "But do not worry. I am here now. I will take care of everything." And she did. She took care of everything. She took care of isolating me from my friends. She took care of firing my loyal secretary. She took care of bringing Greg into our lives under the guise of a financial advisor. Lying in the guest bed in Chicago, I clenched my fist. My left hand was weaker than my right, a permanent reminder of that day. But it was still strong enough to crush a throat if it had to. But I was not a violent man. Violence is for people who cannot think. For 5 years I had played the fool. I had let her treat me like a child. I had let her humiliate me. I had let her bring her lover into my house. All to reach this moment. All to ensure that when I struck back, I would not just wound her. I would destroy her completely. The first crack in my heart had happened on that patio in Florida. But tonight, that crack had become a canyon, and Patricia was about to fall into it. I closed my eyes and finally drifted into a light sleep. The sounds of the party dying down the hall. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them drink my wine. Tomorrow the hangover begins. And it will be a hangover that lasts the rest of their miserable lives. 4 years ago, the investigation did not begin in a high-rise office with marble floors and expensive coffee. It began in a place that smelled of stale grease and regret. I was sitting in the back booth of a roadside diner called the Rusty Spoon, about 20 miles outside of the city limits. It was raining that night. A cold, relentless Chicago rain that slashed against the windows like it was trying to break in. I was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes and a coat that was far too old for a man of my net worth. I blended in with the truck drivers and the weary shift workers nursing their black coffees. I was not Harlan Ford, the construction tycoon, that night. I was just a man looking for answers he did not want to find. The man I was meeting was named Miller. He was a former detective who had been kicked off the force 10 years prior for cutting corners and breaking rules. He was rough around the edges, and he had the manners of a stray dog. But he was the best private investigator in the state because he did not care about politeness. He only cared about the truth. Miller slid into the booth opposite me. He did not say hello. He did not shake my hand. He simply dropped a thick manila envelope onto the sticky table between us. The sound it made was heavy, like a judge's gavel hitting the bench. Miller signaled the waitress for coffee and then looked at me with eyes that had seen every sin humanity was capable of committing. "You are not going to like this, Mr. Ford," Miller said, his voice raspy from years of chain smoking. "In fact, you are going to wish you had never hired me." I looked at the envelope. My hand hovered over it. For a second, I hesitated. Once I opened that flap, there was no going back. Ignorance is a luxury, and I was about to bankrupt myself of it. "Just tell me," I said. "Is she seeing someone?" Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Seeing someone is the least of your problems. Your wife Patricia told you her friend Greg was a venture capitalist, right? A high-flying investor from Silicon Valley who was helping her manage her portfolio." I nodded. That was the story. Greg was supposed to be a genius with startups. Miller reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs. He spread them out on the table like a winning poker hand. "Meet Greg the genius," Miller said with a sneer. The photos did not show a boardroom. They did not show a tech campus. They showed the bright neon lights of Las Vegas. In one photo, Greg was sitting at a blackjack table at the Bellagio, his tie loosened, his face slick with sweat. In another, he was slumped over a slot machine, looking like he had just lost his soul. In the third, he was being escorted out of a casino by two large security guards. "He is not an investor," Miller continued. "He is a whale. But not the good kind. He is a degenerate gambler. Harlan, the guy owes money to people you do not want to meet. He is banned from 3 major casinos. He is drowning in debt." I picked up one of the photos. Greg looked pathetic, desperate. This was the man Patricia was infatuated with. This was the man she had brought into my home. "But where is he getting the money?" I asked. "If he is broke, how is he living this lifestyle? How is he flying first class?" Miller pulled out the second part of his report. These were bank statements, pages and pages of highlighted transactions. "This is where it gets ugly," Miller said, lowering his voice. "Patricia has been very clever. She set up a charity foundation about 3 years ago, the Angels of Hope. Sounds nice, doesn't it? She told you it was to help orphans in Eastern Europe." I remembered. I had signed the checks myself. I was proud of her for wanting to give back. "It is a shell company," Miller explained. "The address for the charity is a P.O. box in a strip mall in Nevada. The money goes in from your joint account, and it goes out the next day, directly to shell accounts controlled by casino debt collectors. She is not feeding orphans, Harlan. She is feeding the slot machines. She has funneled over $2 million of your money to cover this loser's debts." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. $2 million. I had worked hard for that money. I had frozen on construction sites in the dead of winter to earn that money. And she was flushing it down the toilet for a man who looked at me like I was garbage. But then Miller turned the page to the last document. And this was the moment that broke me. This was the moment that turned my sadness into cold, hard steel. "I found one more thing," Miller said softly. "And honestly, Harlan, this one made me sick." He pointed to a specific transfer. It was for $50,000, but it did not come from our joint account. It came from a separate, specific account number. I stared at the numbers. I knew them by heart. 0821994. That was not just a bank account. That was the Mary Ford Scholarship Fund. My breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred. Mary was my first wife, the love of my life. She had been a teacher, a woman who believed that education could save the world. When she died of cancer 30 years ago, I sold her car, her jewelry, and everything she owned to start that fund. Every year on her birthday, I added to it. That money was sacred. It was meant to send underprivileged kids to college. It was Mary's legacy. It was the only piece of her I had left in this world. Patricia knew that. Patricia knew that account was untouchable. She took it, Miller said, reading the look on my face. She drained it 3 months ago. She forged your signature on the transfer authorization. The fund is empty, Harlan. There is nothing left. No scholarships this year. I looked down at the table. I saw my distorted reflection in the napkin dispenser. I saw a man who had been a fool. Patricia had not just cheated on me. She had not just stolen my money. She had desecrated the memory of the only woman who had ever truly loved me. She had stolen the future from children who needed that money to survive just to keep her boyfriend's kneecaps from being broken by loan sharks. I sat there in silence for a long time. The waitress came over to refill my coffee, but I waved her away. The rain pounded harder against the glass, matching the rhythm of the rage building inside my chest. Mr. Ford Miller asked cautiously, "What do you want to do? We have enough here for a divorce. We can go to the police. I can have Greg arrested for fraud by tomorrow morning." I looked up at Miller. My eyes were dry. The tears I wanted to shed for Mary would have to wait. "No," I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. It was low and devoid of any warmth. "No police. Not yet." "Why not?" Miller asked, surprised. "Because if I arrest them now, they just go to jail," I said. "They lose a few years of their lives. That is not enough. They stole a legacy. They stole dignity. I want to take everything from them, Miller. I want them to think they have won. I want them to climb so high that when I kick the ladder out from under them, the fall will shatter every bone in their bodies." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a thick envelope of cash. I slid it across the table to Miller. "Keep digging," I ordered. "I want to know everything. I want to know where they eat, where they sleep, and who they owe money to. I am going to build a trap, Miller, and I am going to use their own greed as the bait." Miller looked at the cash. Then he looked at me. He nodded slowly, a look of respect crossing his rugged face. "You are the boss," he said. "I will get you what you need." I stood up and buttoned my old coat. I walked out of the diner into the pouring rain. The cold water felt good on my face. It felt like a baptism. The Harlan Ford who walked into that diner was a victim. The Harlan Ford who walked out was an executioner. I got into my car and looked at the photo of Greg one last time before tossing it onto the passenger seat. "Enjoy the money while it lasts," I whispered to the empty car. "Because I am coming for you, and I am bringing hell with me." The memory of that afternoon 2 years ago is etched in my mind with the sharpness of a diamond cutting glass. It was a Tuesday, a gray and overcast day in downtown Chicago. We were sitting in the office of Patricia's lawyer, David. The room smelled of expensive leather and moral decay. I was sitting in a chair that was slightly too low, a psychological trick lawyers use to make you feel small. Patricia was sitting next to me, holding my hand so tight her fingernails were digging into my skin. On the mahogany desk in front of us lay a document that was essentially a death warrant for my financial freedom. It was a durable power of attorney. David the lawyer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, avoiding my eyes. He pushed the document toward me. "Harlan," he said, his voice oily and insincere. "This is just a precaution. Given your recent episodes of confusion and memory loss, Patricia thinks it is best if she has the legal authority to handle your affairs. Just in case, you know. Just in case you forget to pay the bills or make a bad investment." I looked at Patricia. She had her sad face on, the one she practiced in the mirror. "Oh, honey," she said, squeezing my hand. "I just want to protect you. Remember last week when you forgot where you parked the car? What if you forget to pay the insurance premiums? What if you lose the house? I just want to take the burden off your shoulders." I remembered leaving the car at the mall because she had taken the keys from my pocket when I was napping and moved it. She was gaslighting me, creating a narrative of decline that did not exist. But I knew that if I fought her, if I refused to sign, she would just try harder. She would petition the court for guardianship. She would drag me through a humiliating public trial to prove I was incompetent. I could not let that happen. I needed her to think she had won, so she would stop looking for new ways to hurt me. I looked at the pen David was holding out to me. It was a heavy black Mont Blanc. I reached for it. But I did not reach with my right hand, which had signed billion-dollar contracts for 40 years. I reached with my left hand. I let my arm shake violently. I gripped the pen like a toddler learning to write. I leaned over the paper. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. I could feel the heat of their anticipation. They were like vultures waiting for the animal to finally stop kicking. I pressed the pen to the paper and scratched out a signature that was barely legible. It looked like the scrawl of a man whose nervous system was collapsing. It looked nothing like the signature on file at my bank. There I stammered, dropping the pen as if it were too heavy. "Is that okay?" Patricia snatched the paper up before the ink was even dry. She looked at it, and a flash of pure greed crossed her face before she hid it behind a smile. "It is perfect, darling," she said. "You did the right thing. Now you do not have to worry about anything ever again." David notarized it immediately, sealing the trap. They thought the trap was for me. They did not realize I had just handed them a weapon they would eventually use to shoot themselves in the foot. By signing with my left hand and intentionally altering my signature, I had created plausible deniability. But more importantly, I had given them the confidence to overreach. Flash forward to the present, to the night of the party. While I sat in my wheelchair in the living room, listening to the silence of the aftermath, Patricia and Greg were in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was a vegetable. But I was wide awake watching them on the monitor of my iPad, which was hidden beneath the blanket on my lap. The camera I had installed in the kitchen chandelier gave me a bird's-eye view of their celebration. They were popping another bottle of champagne. Greg was sitting on the granite counter, swinging his legs like a teenager. Patricia was leaning against the island, holding that power of attorney document like it was a holy scripture. "We do it tomorrow morning," Greg said, his mouth full of expensive caviar. "As soon as the markets open. We use this POA to liquidate the Class A shares. The old man has $50 million tied up in those construction bonds. We sell it all." Patricia laughed, throwing her head back. $50 million? Do you know what we can buy with $50 million, Greg? We can buy that villa in Tuscany. We can finally get rid of this gloomy house. And the boat. Greg interrupted. "Do not forget the boat. I saw a Sunseeker 80-footer in Miami. It is listed for $6 million. We can pay cash, Patricia. Cash." Imagine the look on the salesman's face. I watched them on the screen, feeling a detached sense of amusement. They were spending money that did not exist. They were planning a future on a foundation of sand. "What about Harlan?" Patricia asked, taking a sip of wine. "We cannot take him to Italy. He is dead weight." Greg shrugged. "Put him in a home. There is that place upstate, the one with the high walls. Stick him in there and pay them to keep him quiet. Once we have the cash in our offshore accounts, who cares what happens to him? He won't last a year anyway." My hand tightened around the iPad. Put him in a home. They were discussing my disposal as if I were an old piece of furniture. This was the final confirmation I needed. There was no shred of humanity left in them. Patricia looked at the document again. "Are you sure this will work, Greg? What if the bank asks questions? His signature looks shaky." Greg hopped off the counter and grabbed her by the waist. "Baby, look at the date. He signed this 2 years ago. We have the medical records you faked showing he has been declining for years. The bank won't ask questions. I already talked to a guy at the branch. He said with a POA this broad we can do whatever we want. We can empty the accounts, close the safe deposit boxes, and sell the real estate. It is a license to print money." He kissed her neck. "By noon tomorrow, we will be richer than God." and Harlan Ford will just be a broke old man rotting in a nursing home. They clinked their glasses together. To the yacht, Greg said. To freedom, Patricia replied. I turned off the screen. I carefully placed the iPad back in the hidden pocket of my wheelchair. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside. They were right about one thing. By noon tomorrow, everything would change. But they were wrong about the direction the money would flow. They were going to walk into the bank tomorrow, armed with that power of attorney. They were going to try to access accounts that I had legally emptied and transferred to the irrevocable trust years ago. And when they tried to use that document to sell assets that no longer belonged to me, they would be committing bank fraud, federal wire fraud, identity theft. I had not just given them a rope. I had built the gallows, tied the noose, and showed them how to stand on the trap door. All they had to do was pull the lever. I adjusted my blanket and closed my eyes, allowing a small, genuine smile to touch my lips for the first time in years. Go ahead, I thought. Buy the yacht. Dream about Tuscany. Because the only place you are going is a federal prison cell. And I will be the one waving goodbye. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The clock on the wall of my wine cellar read 3 a.m. The air down here was cool and smelled of damp earth and aged oak. It was the only place in the house where I felt safe from the prying eyes of the cameras and the greedy hands of my wife. I sat at the small tasting table, my wheelchair pushed to the side. Across from me sat Arthur Blackwood. He was not just my attorney. He was the only man in Chicago I trusted with my life. He had been my best friend since we were both broke college students trying to figure out how to pay for tuition. Now, he was the architect of my revenge. Arthur placed a heavy leather briefcase on the table. He opened it with a satisfying click. Inside were stacks of documents that could either send me to prison or set me free, depending on how we played our cards. He pulled out a thick binder labeled Project Trojan. Are you sure about this, Harlan? Arthur asked, his voice low and serious. Once we execute this final phase, there is no going back. If they find out before tomorrow morning, they could freeze everything. They could claim you are mentally incompetent and challenge the trust. I poured us both a glass of water. My hand was steady. I was done shaking. Let them try, I said. They are too arrogant to check the fine print, Arthur. They see the house, they see the cars, and they assume the ownership papers are still in my name. They never bothered to look at the county clerk records. Arthur smiled, a thin, predatory smile that I had seen him use to dismantle hostile witnesses in court. He opened the binder and pointed to a flowchart that looked like a tangled web. Let us review it one last time, he said, just to be safe. 5 years ago, right after your stroke, we established the Caroline Ford Irrevocable Trust. You transferred 99% of your assets into it. The house, the construction company shares, the investment portfolio, even the vintage car collection. I nodded. It was the smartest thing I ever did. An irrevocable trust is exactly what it sounds like. Once the assets are in, they are gone. I do not own them anymore. I am not the trustee. I am not the beneficiary. Legally speaking, Harlan Ford is a pauper. I am a man living in a house he does not own, driving a car he borrows, and spending an allowance granted by a third-party trustee. And that trustee is me, Arthur said, tapping his chest. I hold the keys, Harlan, and the beneficiary is Caroline. The moment you signed those papers, you became judgment-proof. Patricia can sue you for divorce. She can sue you for emotional distress. She can try to take half of your wealth. But half of zero is zero. But here is the beauty of the plan, I said, leaning forward. Patricia does not know the trust exists. She thinks she is staring at a gold mine, but she is actually staring at a mirage. Arthur pulled out a second folder. This one was red. These are the decoys, he explained. For the last 4 years, I have been generating monthly financial statements for a shell company called HF Holdings. It looks exactly like your old company. The letterhead is the same. The account numbers are similar. And the balances are astronomical. I picked up one of the fake statements. It showed a balance of $32 million in liquid assets. It showed stock options worth another 50. It looked real. It felt real. Patricia had been stealing these statements from my desk drawer for years. I knew she was doing it. I had even left the key to the drawer in her jewelry box just to make it easy for her. She reads these every night, I said. I have seen her. She sits in bed with a calculator adding up her share. She thinks she is entitled to 50% of this fantasy. She is entitled to 50% of a company that has 0 assets and a registered agent in a strip mall in Delaware, Arthur corrected. If she tries to access this money, the bank will tell her the account does not exist. Or worse, she will try to borrow against it. Which is exactly what she is doing, I said. That power of attorney she forced me to sign. She is going to use it to leverage assets that are already owned by the trust. Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. That is the part that worries me, Harlan. When she walks into that bank tomorrow and tries to sign a loan agreement using the house as collateral, she is committing mortgage fraud. She is pledging an asset she does not have the authority to pledge. And Greg, if he countersigns as a witness or a beneficiary, he is an accomplice. I know, I said. That is the point. I am not just stripping them of their inheritance, Arthur. I am handing them a criminal record. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the wine fridge. It was a heavy thing to send your wife to prison, even a wife like Patricia. But then I remembered the way she looked at me when I had my stroke. I remembered the way she let me lie on the hot stones of the patio, waiting for me to die. I remembered Greg calling me a dog. I remembered them mocking Caroline. They made their choice, I said softly. I gave them every chance, Arthur. If Patricia had just been honest, if she had come to me and said she fell in love with someone else, I would have let her go. I would have given her a settlement. We could have parted ways with dignity. But she wanted it all. She wanted the money and she wanted me dead. She wanted to humiliate me in my own home. Arthur nodded slowly. Greed makes people blind, he said. They see the cheese, but they never see the trap. He closed the binder and locked the briefcase. So tomorrow is the day, he said. Tomorrow is the day, I confirmed. At noon. I have already alerted the bank manager. He is expecting them. He knows not to stop them until the ink is dry on the loan papers. Once they sign, once they accept the wire transfer, the trap snaps shut. The FBI is already monitoring Greg's offshore accounts. As soon as that money hits, they will have him for money laundering too. Arthur stood up and extended his hand. It was a firm, warm handshake, the handshake of a man who knows he has won. You are a dangerous man, Harlan Ford, he said with a grin. I am glad I am on your side. I am not dangerous, I replied. I am just a father protecting his daughter, and a husband who is tired of sleeping with the enemy. Arthur left through the side door of the cellar, which led directly to the garden. I watched him go, disappearing into the shadows of the yard. I was alone again in the silence. I looked around the cellar at the bottles of wine I had collected over a lifetime. Some of these bottles were older than Patricia. They had aged well. They had character. They had substance. Unlike her. I wheeled myself over to the small safe hidden behind a row of Merlot. I spun the dial and opened it. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle. The USB drive containing the video evidence of their affair, and the audio recordings of them plotting to put me in a home. I took the drive and held it in my hand. It felt light, but it carried the weight of justice. I looked at my watch. It was now 4 a.m. The sun would be rising soon. Upstairs, Patricia and Greg were probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of yachts and villas. They were dreaming of a life without me. They did not know that their dream was about to become a nightmare. I wheeled myself back to the elevator that would take me up to the main floor. I needed to get back into bed. I needed to put my mask back on. I needed to be the shaking, senile old man for just a few more hours. But as the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. I was not smiling, but my eyes were burning. The Trojan horse was inside the walls. The soldiers were ready, and Troy was about to burn. 3 days before the curtain was set to rise on my final act, my body decided to betray me. It started with a chill that rattled my teeth, followed by a heat so intense I felt like I was back on the asphalt of a roofing job in the middle of July. My temperature spiked to 103 degrees. I was sweating through the sheets, my skin gray and clammy. For a man of 70, a fever like that is not just uncomfortable, it is a knocking at death's door. I pressed the call button I had installed by my bedside. It rang in the kitchen, where I knew Patricia was looking at catering menus for the party. It took her 20 minutes to come upstairs. When she finally opened the door, she did not bring a cool washcloth. She did not bring a glass of water. She brought a look of sheer annoyance, as if my sickness was a personal insult to her schedule. "Patricia," I wheezed, my voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. "I need a doctor." "Call Dr. Evans. I think it is an infection." She stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. She was wearing a white silk blouse that cost more than my first car. She looked at me with a mixture of disgust and boredom. "We are not calling Dr. Evans Harlan," she said sharply. "Do you know how much he charges for a house call? Besides, we are busy preparing for your birthday. I do not have time to deal with your hypochondria. You are just having a bad day. Sleep it off." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small orange bottle. She shook 2 blue pills into her palm. "Here," she said, thrusting them at me. "Take these. They will knock you out for 12 hours. By the time you wake up, you will feel better. Or you won't. Either way, you will be quiet." I knew those pills. They were not antibiotics. They were heavy sedatives, the kind they give to patients in psychiatric wards to keep them from screaming. If I took them, in my weakened state with a fever this high, my heart might just stop. And maybe that is exactly what she wanted. A widow is much more sympathetic at a birthday party than a divorced woman. I took the pills with a shaking hand. I put them in my mouth. Patricia watched me like a hawk. I took a sip of the stale water on my nightstand and swallowed. Or at least I pretended to. I tucked the pills under my tongue, a trick I had learned from watching prison documentaries during my sleepless nights. "Good," Patricia said, turning off the light. "Stop being such a baby, Harlan." She slammed the door, leaving me in the darkness. As soon as she was gone, I spit the dissolving pills into a tissue and hid it inside my pillowcase. I lay there, burning up, feeling the fever distort the shadows in the room. I felt incredibly alone. I thought about my daughter, Caroline. I wanted to call her, but Patricia had taken my cell phone, saying the radiation was bad for my pacemaker. It was a lie, of course, but it kept me isolated. I drifted in and out of a fever dream. I saw my father. I saw the first job site I ever worked on. I saw the face of my first wife. And then I heard the door creak open again. It was not Patricia this time. The silhouette was too broad. The smell of expensive scotch and cheap cigars filled the room instantly. It was Greg. He did not turn on the main light. He used the flashlight on his phone, cutting a beam through the darkness. He thought I was unconscious, sedated by the lethal dose Patricia had given me. I kept my eyes closed, leaving only a tiny slit open, just enough to see him move. He walked around the room, touching things. He picked up a silver picture frame of me and Caroline and placed it face down on the dresser. He opened my closet door and ran his hand over my suits. "I wonder if these will fit me," he muttered to himself. "Maybe with a little tailoring." Then he moved to the corner of the room behind the heavy velvet drapes. There was a wall safe there. It was where I kept my personal documents and a few items of sentimental value. The combination was in my head, or so I thought. Greg pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. Patricia. She must have found the combination in my old notebook, the one I thought was hidden in the garage. She had betrayed every secret I had. I heard the beeping of the keypad. 1, 9, 5, 4. The year I started my company. The safe clicked open. I lay frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I prayed he was just looking for cash. There was about $5,000 in there. He could take it. I did not care about the paper. But he did not take the cash. He reached into the back of the safe and pulled out a small mahogany box. "No!" I screamed inside my head. "Anything but that." It was my Patek Philippe, a vintage 1952 reference 2499. It was not just a watch. It was the first thing my father bought when he finally made it out of poverty. He wore it every day for 40 years. He was wearing it when he died. He gave it to me on his deathbed, telling me that time is the only currency you can never earn back. That watch was my history. It was my soul. Greg opened the box. The gold caught the light of his phone flashlight. He whistled low and appreciative. "Hello, beautiful," he whispered. He took the watch off the velvet cushion. He unclasped the leather strap. And then he did the unthinkable. He put it on his own wrist. He held his arm up, admiring the way it looked. He turned his wrist this way and that, letting the gold shine. He walked over to my bed. He stood right over me. I could feel the heat of his body. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He leaned down close to my face. "Wakey, wakey, old man," he taunted softly. "Look at this." He tapped the face of the watch with his finger. "This is wasted on you, Harlan," he said. "A dead man does not need to know the time. This looks much better on me, doesn't it? It looks like power. It looks like the future." He laughed, a cruel sound that vibrated in his chest. "Do not worry," he continued. "I will take good care of it. I will wear it when I spend your money. I will wear it when I sleep in your bed. And when you are finally in the ground, I will wear it to your funeral and check the time to see how long until the reading of the will." He patted my feverish cheek with the hand that was wearing my father's watch. The cold metal brushed against my burning skin. It felt like a brand, a mark of ownership. "Sleep tight, Pops," he said. "The big day is coming." He turned and walked out of the room, still wearing the watch. He left the safe door wide open. He left the empty mahogany box on the floor. He did not care. He knew I was powerless to stop him. I lay there in the silence, and for the first time in years, I cried. Hot tears rolled down my temples into the pillow. I cried for the loss of my father's legacy. I cried for the sheer indignity of being robbed by a man who had never done an honest day's work in his life. I cried because I felt small and weak and broken. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. The fever that was burning my body began to change. It stopped being a sickness and started to feel like a forge, a fire that was burning away the fear and leaving only hardened steel behind. He took my watch. Fine. He took my dignity. Fine. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the will of a man who has nothing left to lose. I closed my eyes and visualized the watch on his wrist. I visualized the smirk on his face. And I swore to myself that when the hammer finally fell, it would not just be for the money. It would not just be for the house. It would be for that watch. I would get it back. And I would make sure that the hand he wore it on would never be able to touch anything of mine ever again. I lay in the dark, breathing through the heat. 3 days. Just 3 more days. I could survive this fever. I could survive the pills. I could survive the humiliation. Because now, I had a new purpose. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for vengeance. And vengeance is the best medicine a man can ask for. The applause for Patricia's toast died down slowly, replaced by a murmur of confused whispers. The guests were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, holding their crystal glasses like shields. They did not know where to look. Should they look at the triumphant wife who had just confessed to a 30-year lie? Or should they look at the pathetic old man sitting in a wheelchair, soaking wet and trembling? Greg was leaning against the grand piano, looking like he had just conquered a kingdom. He took a sip of my scotch and winked at his son Leo, who was still lounging in my favorite chair. They thought the script was written. They thought the curtain was falling on the tragedy of Harlan Ford. But they were wrong. The curtain was just rising. And this was not a tragedy. It was a demolition. I sat there for one final second, savoring the silence. I looked at the watch on Greg's wrist. My father's Patek Philippe. It glinted under the chandelier lights, ticking away the seconds of their freedom. That watch was the signal. It was time. I stopped shaking. It happened instantly. One moment my hands were vibrating with a feigned palsy, the next they were as still as stone. I placed my palms flat on the leather armrests of the wheelchair. The leather was cool and smooth. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in hours. The fever was gone. The fog was gone. The only thing left was the cold, hard, structural steel of my resolve. I pushed down. My triceps engaged. My legs, which everyone assumed were atrophied from months of disuse, locked into place. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and powerful. I rose from that chair like a titan rising from the earth. I straightened my back, pushing my shoulders down and lifting my chin. I felt my spine crack and align. I grew 3 inches in height, instantly transforming from a shriveled invalid into a 6'2" monument of a man. The sound in the room vanished. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. A glass shattered somewhere in the back of the room, but no one turned to look. All eyes were on me. Greg dropped his glass. The scotch splashed onto his expensive shoes, but he did not notice. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked like a deer staring into the headlights of a semi-truck that had just realized it was not stopping. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Harlan," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Sit down. You are confused. You are going to fall." I did not look at her. Not yet. I adjusted the cuffs of my jacket. I brushed the invisible dust from my lapel. Then I took a step. It was not the shuffle of an old man. It was the stride of the CEO who had walked the steel beams of skyscrapers in the wind. My dress shoes clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. The sound echoed like a metronome counting down their doom. I walked past Greg. He instinctively took a step back, shrinking away from me. The arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by a primal fear. He was big, but he was soft. He saw something in my eyes that terrified him. He saw a predator. I walked up the 3 small steps to the stage. I moved with a grace that defied my age. I stood next to Patricia. Up close, I could see the heavy makeup cracking around her eyes. I could smell the fear coming off her in waves. It smelled sour. I reached out and took the microphone from her hand. She did not resist. Her fingers were limp. She was paralyzed by the impossibility of what she was seeing. The man she had drugged, gaslighted, and buried was standing next to her, and he was 10 feet tall. I tapped the microphone once. Thump. The sound boomed through the speakers, causing the guests to jump. I looked out at the crowd. I saw my lawyer, Arthur Blackwood, standing in the back corner, raising a glass to me with a small smile. I saw my daughter Caroline, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes wide with a dawning hope. I spoke. My voice was not the wheezing whisper they had heard for the last year. It was a baritone rumble, deep and resonant. The voice that had commanded thousands of workers and negotiated billion-dollar deals. "Thank you all for coming," I said. My voice filled the room, reaching every corner without effort. "I apologize for the theatrics, but sometimes to catch a rat, you have to play dead." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I turned to Patricia. She was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to deny the reality standing in front of her. "Harlan," she stammered. "But the doctor, the pills." "I threw the pills in the trash, Patricia," I said calmly. "Just like I am about to throw your plans in the trash. You thought I was weak. You thought I was senile. You thought you could parade your lover and his bastards in my house on my birthday, and I would just smile and drool." I took a step closer to her. She flinched. "You made a mistake, Patricia. You forgot who I am. I did not inherit this house. I built it. I dug the foundation. I poured the concrete. And I know how to tear it down." I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. The movement was sharp. Greg flinched as if I were reaching for a gun. But I pulled out the small black velvet box, the same box I had held in the teaser, the box that contained the end of her world. I held it out to her. "Happy anniversary, darling," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "You said you wanted your family to be whole. You said you wanted honesty. Well, here it is." She stared at the box. She did not want to take it. She knew instinctively that whatever was inside was radioactive. But with 50 witnesses watching, she had no choice. Her hand reached out, shaking violently. Her fingers brushed against mine, and her skin was freezing. She took the box. "Open it," I commanded. The authority in my voice was absolute. She fumbled with the clasp. It took her 2 tries because her coordination was gone. The lid snapped open. There were no diamonds inside. There was no gold. Just a silver USB drive and a piece of paper folded into a sharp square. "Read it," I said, pointing to the paper. "Read it to your new family." Patricia unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the document. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her pale as a sheet. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the podium to stay upright. She made a sound, a strangled whimper that was barely human. "What is it?" Greg yelled from the floor, finding his voice. "What does it say?" Patricia could not speak. She just stared at the paper as if it were a ghost. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "Since my wife seems to be at a loss for words, allow me to translate. That is a court order from the state of Nevada. It is a decree of divorce granted 4 years ago on the grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance." The crowd erupted. The noise was deafening. "That is right," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. "We have not been married for 4 years, Patricia. Today is not your 30th anniversary. It is just another Tuesday, and you are just a guest in my house." Patricia dropped the paper. It floated down to the stage floor, landing softly. She looked at me with eyes full of horror. She realized the trap had snapped shut. She realized that every dollar she thought she had earned, every right she thought she had accrued, had vanished in a puff of smoke. "But wait," I said, smiling, a cold, terrible smile. "There is more. That USB drive you were holding. Do you want to know what is on it?" I motioned to the large projection screen behind us, which was set up to show a montage of photos from my life. Arthur hit the play button. The screen flickered to life. And the silence that fell over the room this time was the silence of the grave. The climax had begun, and there was nowhere left for them to hide. The paper in Patricia's hands was shaking so violently that it made a crinkling sound like dry leaves burning in a fire. The microphone was still in my hand, and the speakers amplified every ragged breath she took. The room was so silent that I could hear the ice melting in the untouched drinks on the tables. 50 people were leaning forward, their eyes glued to the woman in the red dress who was watching her entire life crumble into dust. "Read it," I commanded again, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Read the title of the document and the date. Do not make me ask you a 3rd time, Patricia." She looked up at me with eyes that were pleading for mercy. She wanted me to stop. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But I just stared back at her with the cold indifference of a judge delivering a verdict. I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. So I stepped closer. I loomed over her, casting a long shadow that swallowed her whole. "Read it," I roared. She flinched as if I had struck her. She looked down at the paper and began to read. "Decree of dissolution of marriage," she stammered. "State of Nevada, Clark County Family Court." "Keep going," I said softly. "Read the date, Patricia. That is the most important part." She swallowed hard. Her eyes darted back and forth across the page, trying to find a mistake, trying to find a way out. But there was no way out. The ink was black and permanent. "Date of entry," she read, her voice breaking into a sob. "October 14th, 2021. A collective gasp went through the room. The math was simple. The guests began to whisper. October 2021. That was 4 years ago. Patricia dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to the velvet box. She looked at me, shaking her head in denial. "No," she screamed. "This is fake. This is a forgery. We are married. We have been married for 30 years today. I am your wife, Harlan. You cannot just divorce me without me knowing. That is impossible." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. Impossible is a word used by people who do not understand the law. "Patricia," I said, addressing the crowd as much as her. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, my dear ex-wife spent a lot of time in Las Vegas, visiting her friend Greg here. She thought she was being clever, hiding in a different state. But she forgot that when you commit a crime in a jurisdiction, you subject yourself to its laws." I walked over to the edge of the stage, looking down at Greg. He was sweating now, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Nevada has some very interesting statutes regarding divorce," I continued. "Specifically, when one spouse can prove that the other is dissipating marital assets to fund an addiction or an extramarital affair, the court can grant an immediate divorce to protect the innocent party. And if the plaintiff can prove that notifying the defendant would result in physical harm or further financial theft, the judge can allow for service by publication or, in extreme cases, conceal the record entirely until the assets are secured." I turned back to Patricia. "I filed for divorce 4 years ago, Patricia. I submitted the evidence of your affair. I submitted the bank records showing you were stealing from the scholarship fund to pay Greg's gambling debts." The judge in Nevada was appalled. He granted the divorce immediately. He gave me full ownership of all assets as restitution for your theft. And because I told him I was afraid you would kill me if you found out before I could secure my estate, he sealed the file. I took a step closer to her, enjoying the look of absolute terror on her face. "You thought you were waiting out the clock," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You thought you just had to keep the old man alive until the 30-year mark so you could trigger the clause in the prenuptial agreement. You thought that if we made it to 30 years, you would get half." I pointed to the paper on the floor. "But the clock stopped 4 years ago, Patricia. We were married for 26 years, not 30. You missed the milestone by 4 years. The prenuptial agreement stands. You get nothing. No alimony, no house, no pension." Patricia fell to her knees. It was not a graceful fall. She collapsed under the weight of the truth. She grabbed the hem of my trousers. "Harlan, please," she cried. "This cannot be real. We have lived together for the last 4 years. We slept in the same bed. You ate the food I cooked. We were husband and wife." I pulled my leg away from her grasp with a look of disgust. "No," I corrected her. "We were not husband and wife. For the last 4 years you have been a guest in my house. You have been a roommate. A very expensive, ungrateful roommate who has been stealing the silverware." I looked at Greg. He was backing away slowly, trying to blend into the shadows near the exit. But my security team was already blocking the doors. "And you, Greg," I said, pointing the microphone at him. "You thought you were sleeping with a wealthy heiress. You thought you were waiting for her to cash out so you could buy your yacht. Well, I have bad news for you. You have been sleeping with a divorced, unemployed woman who has 0 assets to her name. She is broke, Greg. She has less money than you do." Greg stopped moving. He looked at Patricia, who was sobbing on the floor. The look on his face was not love. It was not concern. It was pure calculation. He realized he had wasted years on a bad investment. "You lied to me," Greg shouted at Patricia, his voice cracking. "You told me it was a done deal. You told me the money was ours." "I didn't know," Patricia wailed. He tricked me, Greg. He tricked us. I did not trick you, I said, cutting her off. I just let you believe your own lies. I let you live in this house. I paid for your clothes. I paid for your food. I even paid for the gas in the car you used to drive to see him. I did all of that so you would feel safe, so you would get sloppy, so you would bring him here tonight and give me the pleasure of destroying you both at the same time. The room was spinning for Patricia. I could see it in her eyes. The reality of her situation was crashing down. She was not the lady of the manor. She was a trespasser. Every moment of the last 4 years, every dinner party, every vacation, every night she slept in this house, she had been living on my charity without even knowing it. I looked at the guests. They were stunned. But I could see the judgment in their eyes. They knew Patricia. They knew how arrogant she had been. And seeing her stripped of her status, seeing her reduced to nothing, was a spectacle they could not look away from. But the divorce is just the beginning, I said, raising my voice to regain the room's attention. Being divorced means you have no claim to my money, but it does not explain why you are going to prison. Patricia looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. Prison, she whispered. Yes, prison, I said. Because while you were playing house, you and Greg made a very serious mistake. You tried to be clever with the finances. You tried to use legal documents to sell things that did not belong to you. I motioned to Arthur Blackwood. He stepped forward, holding the red folder. You see, I continued, since we were divorced 4 years ago, you had no legal right to act on my behalf. But yesterday, you walked into a bank and used a power of attorney document to sign a loan application. You claimed to be the wife of Harlan Ford. You claimed to have the authority to mortgage this house. I smiled. And that, my dear ex-wife, is called fraud. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had signed the papers as Patricia Ford, wife. But she was not Patricia Ford, the wife. She was Patricia Ford, the divorcee. She had lied on a federal banking document. I watched Greg's face turn the color of ash. He knew what was coming. He tried to run. He actually turned and sprinted toward the French doors leading to the garden. Stop him, I barked. 2 of my security guards tackled him before he could reach the handle. He crashed into a table of hors d'oeuvres, sending trays of shrimp and silver platters clattering to the floor. The room was in chaos. Patricia was screaming. Greg was struggling on the floor. And I stood in the center of it all, the eye of the storm, calm and untouched. The marriage was a lie. The anniversary was a lie. Her future was a lie. The only thing that was real was the piece of paper on the floor, and the man standing above her, holding the remote control to the screen that was about to show the world exactly what kind of monster she really was. Get up, Patricia, I said coldly. The show is not over yet. We still have to watch the home movies. Greg was not a man who was used to losing. In the casinos of Las Vegas, he would double down when the cards were against him, convinced that luck was just one hand away. And right now, in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his arrogance, he decided to double down one last time. He scrambled to his feet, pushing away the security guard who had tackled him. His suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with the manic energy of a gambler who had bet it all on black. You think you are so smart, Harlan, Greg screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. You think a divorce decree scares me? You think I care about your little piece of paper from Nevada? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled document. He waved it in the air like a flag. I have this, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the paper. This is a durable power of attorney, signed by you, notarized, legal. It gives Patricia full control over your assets. And guess what, old man? We used it." Patricia looked up from the floor, wiping her eyes. She looked confused, but a flicker of hope appeared on her tear-stained face. Greg continued his confession, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "We went to the bank this morning while you were drooling in your oatmeal. We leveraged this house. We leveraged the company. We took out a $2 million loan against the equity of this estate. The wire transfer hit my offshore account an hour ago." He laughed, a sound that was more like a bark. "So go ahead. Divorce her. Throw us out. It does not matter. I have $2 million sitting in the Cayman Islands. I won. You lost. I am walking out of here a rich man, and there is nothing you or your lawyers can do about it." The room went silent again. The guests looked at me with renewed pity. $2 million was a lot of money. Greg had raided the castle before burning it down. I looked at Greg. I did not look angry. I looked at him with the kind of soft disappointment a teacher might show a student who failed an open book test. "You mortgaged the house?" I asked calmly. "Yes," Greg sneered. "And the vacation home in Aspen. And the commercial warehouse on 5th Street. We took it all." I nodded slowly. I turned my head toward the back of the room where the shadows were deepest. "Arthur," I said, "would you mind stepping in here? I think these two financial wizards need a lesson in property law." Arthur Blackwood stepped out of the shadows. He walked toward the stage with the slow, inevitable gait of an executioner. He was holding a leather folio. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Greg with pure contempt. "Good evening, everyone," Arthur said, his voice crisp and professional. "My name is Arthur Blackwood. I am Mr. Ford's personal attorney." He turned to Greg. "I heard you mention a power of attorney document," Arthur said. "May I see it?" Greg clutched the paper to his chest. "You cannot touch this. It is binding." "Oh, I do not doubt that it is binding," Arthur said. "That document effectively allows Patricia to act as Harlan Ford. Anything Harlan owns, she can sell. Any account Harlan has, she can access. It is a very powerful piece of paper." Greg grinned, showing his teeth. "Exactly. So back off, lawyer. The money is mine." Arthur smiled back, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There is just one small problem," Arthur said. "A tiny technicality, really. You see, in order to mortgage a house, Harlan Ford has to own the house. In order to leverage a company, Harlan Ford has to own the company." Greg frowned. "What are you talking about? He built this house. He runs the company." Arthur sighed and signaled to the technician running the projector. "Exhibit B, please," Arthur requested. The giant screen behind us changed. The divorce decree vanished, replaced by a complex legal deed. It was a transfer of title. The text was dense, but the bold headers were clear enough for everyone to read. "This," Arthur explained, pointing to the screen, "is a transfer of assets dated 5 years ago. Specifically, it is the deed to this property, the Lake Forest estate." I watched Patricia's eyes scan the screen. I saw her lips move as she read the name of the owner. The Caroline Ford Irrevocable Trust. She whispered the words, and then she froze. "That is correct," Arthur said loud enough for the back row to hear. 5 years ago, after his stroke, Mr. Harlan Ford transferred 100% of his real estate holdings, his stock portfolio, and his liquid cash into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary is his daughter, Caroline. I serve as the independent trustee. Arthur turned back to Greg, who was starting to look like he was going to vomit. Harlan Ford does not own this house, Greg. He is merely a tenant. Harlan Ford does not own the construction company. He is merely an honorary consultant. Harlan Ford does not have $2 million in equity to lend you. On paper, Harlan Ford is worth exactly $0. I stepped forward, taking the microphone back. "Do you understand what that means, Greg?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. Greg shook his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "No," he stammered. "But the bank gave us the money. The wire went through." "Of course it went through," I said, "because I told the bank manager to let it go through. I wanted you to complete the transaction." "Why?" Greg whispered. "Why would you let us take the money if you knew?" "Because I asked," leaning in close so he could see the fire in my eyes. "Because attempting to defraud a bank is a crime, but actually succeeding at it, that is a federal felony." I pointed to the power of attorney in his hand. "You used a document giving you power over my assets to pledge collateral that belongs to a trust," I said. "You represented yourself as the owner of property you do not own. You signed federal loan documents swearing that the title was clear." Arthur stepped in to deliver the final blow. "That is called bank fraud," Arthur stated coldly. "Under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1344. It carries a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. And since you wired the money to an offshore account, you also committed wire fraud and international money laundering." Patricia let out a scream. It was a high, piercing sound of pure terror. She scrambled to her feet and lunged at Greg. "You told me it was legal," she shrieked, clawing at his face. "You told me the lawyer checked it. You said we were safe." Greg pushed her away violently. "I didn't know he yelled. How was I supposed to know he put it in a trust? He tricked us." He turned to me, his face red with rage and fear. "You set us up," he screamed. "You! Entrapment! This is entrapment!" I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. "Entrapment is when the police coerce you into committing a crime you would not otherwise commit," I said. "I did not coerce you, Greg. I didn't make you greedy. I didn't make you steal. I didn't make you drag my wife into a bank and lie to a loan officer. You did that all by yourself. I just left the door unlocked and watched you walk right into the cell." I looked at the screen where the deed to the house was still glowing. "That $2 million you think you have," I continued, "that is not your retirement fund, Greg. That is evidence. The FBI has already flagged the transfer. They are freezing the Cayman account as we speak. You did not just steal money from a bank. You stole a one-way ticket to a maximum security prison." Greg looked at his phone. He was checking his banking app frantically. His fingers were shaking so hard he dropped the phone. It clattered on the floor, sliding toward my feet. I looked down. The screen was cracked. "It is over, Greg," I said softly. The realization hit him like a physical weight. His knees buckled. He sank to the floor right next to Patricia. They looked like two children who had been caught playing with matches after burning down the whole neighborhood. The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring in open-mouthed shock. They had come for a birthday party, and they were witnessing a public execution. But there was no blood, only ink and paper and the crushing weight of the law. I looked at Caroline. She was smiling through her tears. She knew that her inheritance was safe. She knew that the vultures had been starved. But I was not done yet. I looked at the Patek Philippe watch on Greg's wrist. the symbol of my father's legacy. It was ticking away, counting down the seconds until the sirens arrived. "I want my watch back," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Greg looked at his wrist. He looked at the watch as if it were a shackle. He started to undo the clasp, fumbling with the leather strap. "Keep it on," I ordered. He froze. "The police will want to inventory everything you are wearing when they book you," I said. "I want them to take it off you. I want it to be listed on the police report as stolen property. That adds grand larceny to your list of charges." Patricia looked up at me, her eyes swollen. "Harlan," she whispered, "please, I am your wife. Or I was. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means I trusted you," I said, looking down at her. "And you sold that trust for a gambler with a cheap suit and a fake smile. You made your bet, Patricia. Now it is time to pay the dealer." And as if on cue, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second, coming to collect the debt that could not be paid with money. The sound of the sirens was no longer a distant wail. It was right outside the front door. A cacophony of red and blue lights flashing against the sheer curtains of the ballroom windows. The party guests moved toward the walls instinctively, knowing that something violent was about to happen. Greg sat on the floor, his expensive suit ruined, his face pale. He looked up at me with eyes that were trying to solve a math problem that had no solution. "You did this," he whispered hoarsely. "But how? The bank approved it. I saw the confirmation code." "Banks do not lend money on assets that do not belong to the borrower. That is impossible." I took a slow sip of water, enjoying the dryness in his throat compared to the cool satisfaction in mine. "You are right, Greg," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Under normal circumstances, the underwriting department would have flagged the title discrepancy immediately. They would have seen that the house belongs to the trust, and they would have rejected your application in 5 minutes." I wheeled my chair slightly closer to him, leaning down so he could hear the gears of the trap grinding him into dust. "But you did not apply at just any bank," I continued. "You applied at First National of Chicago. You chose them because Patricia told you that was where I did all my business. She told you they would be fast." Patricia looked up from her sobbing. Her mascara was a black smear across her cheek. "What did you do, Harlan?" she gasped. "I did nothing," I said. "But I have sat on the board of directors for First National for 20 years. I know the branch manager personally. When a loan application came in with my name on it, signed with a shaky hand and countersigned by a man with a credit score of 400, the manager called me. He called me yesterday morning, Greg." Greg flinched. "I told him to approve it," I said. "I told him to override the title search. I told him to process the wire transfer to your offshore account. I told him to let you think you had succeeded. Because if he had stopped you at the counter, it would have just been an attempt, a misdemeanor, a mistake. But by letting the money hit your account, we elevated the crime. It is now a completed federal offense. The money you received is not a loan, Greg. It is bait, and you swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker." The front doors burst open with a crash that shook the walls. Federal agents. "Nobody move." 6 agents in windbreakers swarmed the room. They moved with the precision of a military unit. 2 of them went straight for Greg. They hauled him up from the floor by his armpits. He did not fight. He went limp, his legs dragging on the Persian rug. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of finality. "You have the right to remain silent," an agent barked, reciting the Miranda rights that Greg knew all too well. But the chaos was not over. The spotlight shifted to the two people who had been quietly trying to edge toward the kitchen exit. Leo and Mia. The children Patricia had brought into my home to replace my daughter. "Agent, secure the witnesses," I ordered, pointing at them. A female officer stepped in front of Leo, blocking his path. "I didn't do anything," Leo shouted, his voice cracking. "This is not my fault. I don't even know these people." He pointed a shaking finger at his own mother. "She dragged me here," Leo yelled, looking at Patricia with pure hatred. "She told me the old man was dying. She told me we were going to get a payout. I just wanted to play video games. I didn't sign anything." Patricia looked at her son, her eyes widening in shock. "Leo," she whispered, "how can you say that? I did this for us." "For us?" Mia screamed from the other side of the room. "You did this for yourself. You told us he was a vegetable. You told us we would be living in luxury. Now I am going to be arrested. You ruined my life, Mom. You always ruin everything." The venom in their voices was toxic. These were the children Patricia had praised as angels. These were the children she claimed were more deserving of my love than Caroline. And the moment the ship started to sink, they were not just jumping off. They were pushing her under to save themselves. "I am not going to jail for you," Mia spat at her mother. "I will tell them everything. I will tell them how you practiced forging his signature. I will tell them how you laughed about drugging him. I will tell them everything." Patricia shrank back as if she were being physically beaten. The betrayal of her lover was one thing, but the betrayal of her children, the fruit of her womb, was a knife in the heart that twisted with every word. The agents ushered Leo and Mia into the hallway to take their statements. They were not being arrested yet, but they were terrified. They were material witnesses to a conspiracy, and they were singing like birds to save their own skins. Greg was dragged past me toward the door. He stopped for a second, struggling against the agents. He looked at me. There was no arrogance left. Only the hollow look of a man who knows he is going to die in a cage. "The watch," I said, pointing to his wrist. "Take it off." The agent looked at me, then at the Patek Philippe. "It is stolen property, officer," I said. "It belonged to my father." The agent nodded. He unclasped the watch and handed it to me. I held it in my hand. The gold was warm from Greg's skin, but I wiped it on my handkerchief, purifying it. I put it in my pocket. Greg was shoved out the door into the flashing lights of the police cruisers. The room was suddenly quiet. The storm had passed, leaving only the wreckage behind. And standing in the center of that wreckage was Patricia. She was alone, truly alone. The guests had backed away from her, leaving a wide circle of empty floor around her. She looked at the door where Greg had disappeared. She looked at the hallway where her children were selling her out. She looked at the paper on the floor that declared her divorced and destitute. She slowly turned her head to look at me. She looked small. The red dress that was meant to be her victory banner now looked like a costume. Her face was gray. Her hands were empty. "Harlan," she whispered. Her voice was broken, a jagged shard of sound. I did not speak. I just watched her. "I have nothing," she said. Her eyes were unfocused, staring at a future that had just evaporated. "The money is gone. The house is gone. Greg is gone. My kids hate me." She took a shaky step toward me. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "I have no money for a hotel. I have no car. Harlan, You cannot just leave me on the street. I looked at Arthur Blackwood. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single envelope. He walked over and handed it to Patricia. "What is this?" she asked, her hands trembling as she took it. "It is a bus ticket," Arthur said coldly. "One way, to your sister's house in Ohio." Patricia stared at the ticket. Ohio. A place she had sworn never to return to. A place of poverty and obscurity. "And here," Arthur said, handing her a $20 bill, "for food on the way." Patricia looked at the money. It was an insult, a final slap in the face. But she took it. She had to take it. It was the only asset she had in the world. She looked at me one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a deep, profound regret. She realized that she had held a diamond in her hand for 30 years, and she had thrown it away for a handful of glass. "I am sorry," she whispered. I leaned forward in my wheelchair. "No, Patricia," I said softly. "You are not sorry you hurt me. You are sorry you got caught. There is a difference." I signaled to the security guards. "Escort her out," I said, "and make sure she does not take anything, not even a spoon." 2 guards stepped forward. They took Patricia by the arms. She did not fight. She let them lead her away. As she walked to the door, her heels clicking on the floor created a rhythm of defeat. She passed the guests who turned their backs on her. She passed the life she had tried to steal. The heavy oak doors opened. She stepped out into the night. The red and blue lights from the police cars washed over her, illuminating her one last time before she disappeared into the darkness. The doors closed with a heavy thud. I sat there in the silence. My daughter Caroline walked over to me. She sat on the armrest of my wheelchair and put her head on my shoulder. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. "It is over, Dad," she said. "They are gone." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the watch. I wound it carefully, listening to the tiny gears clicking into place. "Yes," I said, "it is over." I looked at the crowd of stunned guests. "I think it is time for some cake," I announced. A nervous laughter rippled through the room. The tension broke. The nightmare was finished. The trap had worked perfectly. I had caught the rats. I had cleaned the house. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt light. I felt clean. But as I looked at the closed doors, I knew the story wasn't quite done. Patricia was gone, but the lesson had to be shared. I needed the world to know that you can push a good man only so far before he pushes back. And when he pushes back, he pushes hard. The silence that followed the departure of the police was heavy and suffocating. The room, which had been filled with the noise of betrayal and the chaos of justice, was now empty save for 3 people. Me, sitting in my wheelchair with my back straight and my hands resting on my knees. My daughter Carolyn standing beside me, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. And Patricia, kneeling on the floor in the center of the room, surrounded by the debris of her shattered life. She looked up at me. Her makeup was ruined, her hair was a mess, and the red dress that was supposed to be her armor was now just a costume for a play that had been canceled. She crawled forward a few inches, her knees dragging on the hardwood floor. It was a pathetic sight, but I felt no pity. I had used up all my pity 5 years ago when I lay on a patio in Florida waiting for help that never came. "Harlan," she sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, you cannot do this to me. We have a history. 30 years, Harlan. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Think about the good times. Think about the vacations. Think about how I took care of you." I looked at her with the cold detachment of a banker reviewing a defaulted loan. She was still trying to play the card of the devoted wife. She still thought that emotional manipulation was a currency that had value in this room. Caroline stepped forward, her face flushed with anger, ready to shout at the woman who had tormented her for years. But I held up my hand to stop her. This was between me and Patricia. This was the final accounting. I did think about the 30 years, Patricia, I said, my voice low and steady. I thought about them every single day for the last 5 years. I thought about them when I watched you steal money from my dead wife's scholarship fund. I thought about them when I watched you hold hands with Greg in my kitchen. And I realized something very important. I leaned forward, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. Those 30 years were an investment, I said. An investment that yielded 0 return. You were never my partner, Patricia. You were a parasite. And tonight, I am finally fumigating the house. Patricia flinched as if I had slapped her. But I wasn't done. I signaled to Arthur Blackwood, who was waiting in the shadows with one final document. He walked over and placed a single sheet of paper on the floor in front of Patricia. "What is this?" she whispered, staring at the paper through her tears. "That is your bill," I said simply. She looked confused. "My bill?" I nodded. "You see, Patricia, for the last 5 years you have been living the high life. You bought designer clothes, you drove luxury cars, you traveled to Las Vegas first class, you handed out cash to Greg like it was candy, and you did all of that using money that you stole from me." I pulled a small black notebook from my pocket. I kept a ledger, I continued. Every transaction, every credit card swipe, every wire transfer. I tracked it all. The $2 million you and Greg tried to steal today was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the last 5 years, you have misappropriated exactly $3,200,000 of my money. I paused to let the number sink in. 3.2 million. It was a fortune. It was enough to build a school. It was enough to save 1,000 lives. And she had wasted it on vanity and vice. Patricia shook her head. "No, that is impossible. It wasn't that much." "Numbers do not lie, Patricia," I said. "People lie. You lied. But the math is the math. And now the bill is due." I motioned to the paper on the floor. "So here is your situation," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You are currently facing charges for conspiracy to commit bank fraud. That is a federal crime. If I testify against you, if I hand over my evidence to the FBI, you will go to prison with Greg. You will spend the next 10 to 15 years in a cell wearing an orange jumpsuit and eating food that isn't fit for a dog." Patricia covered her mouth with her hand, muffling a scream. "However," I continued, "I am a businessman, and I prefer restitution over revenge. So I am offering you a choice. A mercy kill, if you will." I pointed to the document. "That paper is a confession of judgment. It states that you acknowledge stealing $3.2 million from me. It states that you agree to repay this debt in full, plus interest. It grants me the right to garnish any wages you earn in the future until the debt is paid." I leaned back in my chair, watching her face. "Option 1. You walk out that door in handcuffs. You go to prison. You lose your freedom. Option 2. You sign that paper. You admit you are a thief. You agree to owe me every penny you earn for the rest of your life. In exchange, I will drop the charges against you. I will let you walk out of here tonight a free woman." Patricia looked at the paper, then at the door. She looked at the life of luxury she was losing and the life of servitude she was being offered. "But Harlan," she cried, $3 million! I can never pay that back. I have no skills. I have no job. I will be working until I die." "Exactly," I said, cold and unyielding. "You will get a job. You will wait tables. You will scrub floors. You will work in a factory. And every month you will send me a check. You will live in a small apartment. You will drive a cheap car. You will learn the value of $1 the hard way. You wanted to live like a queen on my dime. Now you will live like a pauper to pay it back." I looked at my watch. "You have 1 minute to decide, Patricia. The FBI agents are still in the driveway finishing with Greg. I can call them back in right now." The room was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Patricia looked at me, searching for a trace of the man who used to love her. But that man was gone. He had died on a patio in Florida. She reached out a trembling hand and picked up the pen Arthur had placed on the floor. She realized that prison would break her. She was soft. She was weak. At least if she was free, she could survive. She could breathe the air. She bent over the paper. Her tears fell onto the page, smearing the ink as she signed her name. It was not the confident signature she had practiced for the bank. It was the shaky signature of a defeated woman signing away her future. She dropped the pen. "I signed it," she whispered. "Are you happy now?" I motioned to Arthur to take the paper. He checked the signature and nodded to me. It was done. She was legally bound to me forever, not by marriage, but by debt. "Now get out," I said. Patricia stood up. She swayed slightly on her heels. She looked around the room, looking for her purse, looking for her coat. "Leave it," I ordered. She froze. "The coat," I said. "The purse, the jewelry, the shoes. You bought all of those with my money. They belong to me." She looked at me in horror. "You want me to leave barefoot?" "I want you to leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage," I said, which was nothing. She slowly took off the diamond earrings. She took off the pearl necklace. She slipped off the expensive high heels. She stood there in her red dress, barefoot and shivering, stripped of every layer of her false identity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I tossed it onto the floor at her feet. "Buy yourself some flip-flops at the gas station," I said. She stared at the money. For a second, I thought she would spit on it. I thought she would show some spine. But she didn't. She bent down and picked up the $20. She clutched it in her hand like a lifeline. She turned and walked toward the door. She did not look back. She walked with her head down, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She looked small and frail and utterly broken. The security guard opened the front door. A gust of cold wind blew into the room, carrying the scent of rain. Patricia stepped out into the night. She stepped out of the mansion and into a world that would no longer cater to her whims. She stepped into a life of hard work and endless debt. The guard closed the door. The latch clicked shut with a sound that felt like a vault locking. I let out a long breath. My shoulders relaxed. The weight I had been carrying for 5 years was finally gone. The fever was gone. The anger was gone. I looked at Caroline. She was crying, but she was smiling too. She walked over and hugged me, burying her face in my neck. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You really did it." I patted her hair. "We did it, sweetie," I said. "We took out the trash." I looked around the empty room. It was just a house. It was just wood and stone. But now it felt like a home again. It felt clean. I looked at Arthur. "Cancel the rest of the party, Arthur," I said. "I think I just want to sit here for a while with my daughter." Arthur nodded and quietly left the room. I sat there holding my daughter's hand, listening to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The war was over. The enemy was vanquished. And Harlan Ford was finally free. The sun rose over Lake Forest the next morning with a brilliance I had not seen in years. The light hit the water of the lake, turning it into a sheet of hammered gold. I sat on the stone patio of the backyard, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a mug of steaming black coffee. My hands were steady. My breathing was deep and easy. For the first time in a decade, the house behind me was silent. There was no clinking of jewelry, no high-pitched complaints about the maid, no whispered phone calls to a lover. The silence was heavy, but it was the good kind of heavy. It was the weight of peace. The glass door slid open behind me. I did not jump. I knew who it was by the sound of the footsteps. Caroline walked out onto the patio holding her own cup of coffee. She looked tired. The stress of the previous night hung around her eyes. But underneath that fatigue, there was a lightness. She sat down in the wicker chair next to me and pulled her legs up under her blanket, just like she used to do when she was a little girl. We watched the sunrise together for a long time without saying a word. We did not need words. The absence of Patricia was a conversation all by itself. "I am sorry," I said, finally breaking the silence. My voice was soft, losing the booming edge I had used in the ballroom. "I am sorry I had to lie to you, Caroline. I am sorry I had to let you think I was weak. I am sorry I let you think I was losing my mind." Caroline turned to look at me. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm. "I was so scared, Dad," she whispered. "I thought I was losing you. I thought she was going to kill you or put you away. When you started shaking and slurring your words, I grieved for you. I mourned the father I thought was gone." I squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetie. And that was the hardest part of the plan. Seeing you hurt. Seeing you defend me when I could not defend myself. But I had to do it. If I had told you the truth, you would have tried to save me. You would have confronted her too early. And if we had struck too early, we would have only wounded the snake, not killed it. I needed them to commit the crime. I needed them to hang themselves with their own greed." Caroline nodded slowly. She understood. She was my daughter, after all. She had the same steel in her spine that I did. "It worked," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You should have seen Greg's face when the police took him. I have never seen anyone look so terrified." I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was pleasant on my tongue. "He got what he deserved," I said. They both did. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a set of keys. They were the keys to the master safe, the one in the library that held the deeds to the trust and the control codes for the company accounts. I placed them on the table between us. "It is yours now," I said. Caroline looked at the keys, then at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean I am done, Caroline," I said. "I spent 40 years building skyscrapers. I spent 5 years building a trap. I am tired of building things. The trust owns the company, but you are the beneficiary. I want you to take over as the active chairwoman. Arthur will guide you, but you have the instincts. You know the business better than anyone." "But what about you?" she asked. "What are you going to do?" I looked out at the lake. I thought about the map of the world I had in my study, the one with the pins in all the places Mary and I had planned to visit before she got sick. I think I am going to go to Italy, I said. I want to see the Colosseum. I want to drink wine in Tuscany. I want to sit in a cafe in Paris and read a book, without worrying about whether my wife is stealing my money. I want to live, Caroline. I want to live the life I put on hold to protect this family. Tears welled up in Caroline's eyes again. You deserve it, Dad, she said. You deserve everything. We sat there as the sun climbed higher, warming the air. The nightmare was over. The house was ours again. The future was ours again. I looked at my reflection in the dark liquid of my coffee. I looked older than I did 5 years ago. The lines on my face were deeper. My hair was grayer. But the eyes were the same. They were the eyes of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side without being burned. I thought about Patricia. She was probably on a Greyhound bus right now, somewhere in Indiana, staring out the window at the endless cornfields, realizing that her youth was gone. Her beauty was fading, and her bank account was empty. I felt a twinge of something, but it wasn't guilt. It was closure. You know, I said, leaning back in my chair, people always say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but they are wrong. Revenge is not something you serve, it is something you watch. I looked at Caroline and shared the final piece of wisdom I had learned from this ordeal. The sweetest revenge is not making someone suffer, I said. It is not screaming or fighting or hurting them physically. The sweetest revenge is simply handing them the rope and watching them tie the knot themselves. It is letting their own greed and arrogance become the weapon that destroys them. All I did was stand still and wait. They did the rest. They destroyed themselves while I sat here and prepared to enjoy a good cup of coffee. Caroline laughed. It was a genuine happy sound that chased away the last shadows of the previous night. I love you, Dad, she said. I love you too, sweetie, I replied. I took one last look at the house. It was just a building, but it was a fortress, and the king was finally back on his throne. But this king was ready to abdicate. It was time for the queen to rule. I stood up, feeling the strength in my legs. Come on, I said, let us go inside. I think Arthur is bringing donuts. And then I have a plane ticket to book. As we walked back into the house, I felt a sense of lightness I had not felt in decades. The heavy coat of deception was gone. I was just Harlan Ford. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Do not ever underestimate the patience of a man who has been pushed too far. He might look weak. He might look defeated. But he is just waiting for the right moment to strike. And when he does not miss. If you enjoyed this story and felt the satisfaction of justice being served, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. It helps the channel grow, and it helps me bring you more stories of triumph and truth. Here is the biggest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal. We often think that family is defined by blood, but that is a dangerous lie. Family is defined by loyalty, respect, and love. When you invite people into your life who do not share those values, you are inviting a virus into your home. Patricia and Greg were not family. They were opportunists. The lesson is to trust your instincts. If your gut tells you something is wrong, it usually is. Protect your heart, but also protect your assets. Being generous is a virtue, But being naive is a liability. Do not be afraid to be cold when you need to be. Sometimes you have to freeze your heart to save your soul. If you have ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself, let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your story. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. See you in the next story. Stay strong and stay smart.